Every year, parents ask us, what should my child be reading? So I've compiled a list of books suitable for Key Stage 2. Those are years 3, 4, 5 and 6. Obviously, every child is different, so I've split these books into beginner, intermediate and advanced. Timestamps are below if you want to skip ahead, and links are in the description. My first book recommendation is Dogman, The Adventures of Dogman 1. The reason why I'd recommend this book is I've heard from students that it's a very interesting book. I've talked to quite a few of them and they've recommended it. Then I went to check out the book myself and I actually thought it had quite challenging vocabulary. It was quite engaging and it's got that pictorial element that a lot of students like. So this is why I'd recommend it. And it's about a dog that fights crime. I mean, it could have a better name, but it is what it is. My second book is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and the related series. Obviously, growing up, I spent a lot of time reading Harry Potter, as many of my friends did, but I still think it's a timeless classic. It's about a wizard called Harry, who doesn't know that he's a wizard initially.
You're a wizard, Harry.
And he goes off to Hogwarts. I was going to say to fight crime, but he doesn't do that. He's a wizard. And yeah, I think it's full of intrigue, friendship, like battling good versus evil, moral decisions. Is really quite an advanced book for year 3 or 4, but I do think it's valuable. My third book is a series of unfortunate events, the whole series, so I think there's 13 books. I didn't finish all of them, but I do think that they deal with some more complex themes. It's about orphans, so there's 3 children, the Baudelaire orphans, and they go off and they are quite wealthy, and their evil uncle is basically after their money. And I think it's relatively challenging. If you like Harry Potter, then you'll probably like this book too. My fourth book is by Michael Morpurgo. It's Warhorse. Now, I do think children should start to get into more complex themes early on, or as early as possible. So I think a book set around World War I is actually relatively challenging theme-wise, but I think the book is not too complicated and it's quite accessible. And it's about a horse called Joey and sort of the adventures that he goes on. Again, a lot of children and a lot of students have recommended this book to me. My fifth book is Beowulf, specifically the Robert Nye translation and the Robert Nye version. I remember growing up and reading this book, and it's based on an epic poem. I think it's a fantastic book. If you like adventure and stories about heroes, then Beowulf is a brilliant book. My sixth book is Matilda by Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl is obviously a very, very well-known children's writer, and I think his books touch on some more mature themes, but they make them very accessible for children. And Matilda is a young girl and she's got telekinetic powers, and obviously very exciting. And she has quite an impressive school life. So it's very relatable for young children and especially young girls. My seventh book is Silverfin by Charles Higson. I think it's Charles Higson. And it's about James Bond when he was younger. Again, it's one of those books that having talked to a lot of year 6s and year 5s, they seem to enjoy. So, and it's got some of them who weren't really into reading before into reading. So I think it's quite especially for a young boy, I think it's quite a good book for them to read. My eighth book is The Little Prince. Now, I can't remember who wrote that, but I'm not even too sure how to pronounce his name. Antoine de something.
Antoine de Saint-Exupéry.
But essentially, it's about a prince who goes on journeys around planets and encounters loads of mysterious characters. Having gone through it a bit, I think it's actually quite a challenging book, especially for a child. I think it's a good book for a young child to read, and it's not so challenging for a year 4 or 5 child. But I think a year 3 child might find it quite difficult. So my 9th book is Stig of the Dump by Clive King. It's about a boy called Barney. It's quite a funny name for a boy. Barney. I always think of the Simpsons character, so Barney Gumble. And he befriends a caveman, essentially, and they learn and basically they form a friendship. So it's quite a charming book of sort of friendship across time. I wouldn't say it deals with complex themes or anything like that, but I just think it's a good read. My 10th book is The Story of Tracy Beaker, which is a Jacqueline Wilson book. I could have picked because she's quite a prolific writer, so there were quite a few different options there, but I think this is a classic. I remember watching the TV show sort of growing up, and I think again it can appeal to young girls. Although she is a bit of a troublemaker, but so are the best characters. Like most of the best characters in literature are troublemakers. Especially if your child doesn't like reading much, it's a good way of finding a book that relates directly to their life. So those were some of the beginner books. I do think there's quite a wide range of ages that could enjoy that. So I think some of them are more suitable for year 3 and 4, and then some are more suitable for year 5 and 6. Especially, I think Matilda's quite suitable for like year 4 and 5. And maybe 3, but then something like Tracy Beaker might be more suitable for someone who's in year 6, so 5/6. But again, it's a less challenging book. So those were the beginner books. Now let's move on to intermediate. Now intermediate, we have 10 more books here. Book number 1 is Anne of Green Gables. Anne of Green Gables is, I haven't really read the book, but I've seen it appear several times in SATS papers, and I think it's quite a challenging book for a child, but it deals with themes that are relatively straightforward. And as they're going to, I think this is definitely a year 6 book, as they're moving into their adolescent years, I think it's a good sort of transition into that, because it deals with someone who's dealing with the adolescent issues. Book 2 is Just William. Now, Just William is written by Richmal Crompton. I remember reading this book, or these series of books growing up, and I just found it enjoyable reading about someone who was a bit of a clown, and he gets into all kinds of silly situations and has many misunderstandings with his group of followers called the Outlaws. So quite an enjoyable book, but again, it's probably tailored more towards the male audience. My 3rd book is actually quite similar to Just William. It's Jennings, When Jennings Goes to School. Again, it's quite a challenging book, and it's about a boy who goes off to boarding school. It's again about someone who gets into a lot of trouble, but he's a lot more innocent than William, and all of these are sort of caused by his own misunderstandings of situations, not because he's directly choosing to cause trouble, which is sometimes the case with William. My 4th book is from the Narnia series. It's the first of the series, The Magician's Nephew. So The Magician's Nephew is by C.S. Lewis. There's 2 characters. One's called Diggory and one's called Polly, like Polly Plummer or something like that, and the author makes a joke about it at the beginning. This is set in the forming of the world of Narnia, essentially, and they're able to travel between worlds. So I think a lot of people approach the Narnia series and go straight into book 3, which is The Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe. But I do think starting from the beginning, you get a bit more of the lore behind everything, and I really enjoyed the book. So definitely recommend that. My 5th book is Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, and it follows Lyra and her demon. I think his name is Pantilimon or Pan, and basically it's quite similar to, I consider it a bit like Harry Potter, but aimed at an older audience or a slightly more mature audience. So if you like magical worlds and fantasy and that kind of thing, it will appeal to you. My sixth book is The Wind in the Willows. Now, you might be questioning why I've put it not in the beginner section, because it's about animals. And a toad that is obsessed with cars and motor cars. And he's a toad, so I kind of find that ironic, because toads are like killed on roads like constantly. So it follows badger, rat, mole, and toad. The reason why I put it a bit higher is, I think, because of it's the difficulty of the book rather than the themes that are addressed. So I think it's quite a challenging book. However, like, if your child is able to read at quite a high level and is younger, then it would be suitable for them. I'd also recommend just like watching animated version as well, because I think it's enjoyable for a child to see the sort of cartoon version. In the 11 plus curriculum that we've designed, we have 2 or 3 comprehensions based on Wind in the Willows, and the children always find it very challenging to read, but they enjoy the story. So I think, yes, it is a more advanced book, and actually even some adults could enjoy reading it. My 7th book is Anne Frank's Diary of a Young Girl. Now, I know it sort of deals with quite a tragic story. Obviously, it's not really in the book because it's her diary. It shows the struggles that she has as first of all, a teenage girl, but also as a Jewish girl hiding from the Nazis. She's a really, really good writer for her age, and it all comes across in the whole book, and there's a lot of humour and other things in the book, despite the fact that it has a tragic backstory. Again, in our 11 plus course, there's a comprehension from Anne Frank's Diary of a Young Girl. So, you know, it is suitably difficult for 11 plus preparation. My 8th book is Bloodtide by Melvin Burgess. I don't think it's very well known as a book, and not many people have heard of it, but I remember, I think I had a friend at primary school who was in we were in, I think, year 5 at the time, and he bought me the book because he'd read it and he said, you'd really enjoy it. So I think for my birthday or something like that. And it's based around gangs that have taken over a dystopian London. And you've got like genetic hybrids and things like that. So it kind of appeals to the child again who enjoys the fantasy world, mixed with a bit of scientific stuff, which is generally quite enjoyable. Again, I think it probably caters more to a boy, and yet there's a female main character. So kind of interesting. There's 2 in the series, but I've never read the 2nd book. So our 9th book is a real classic. Again, it's Holes by Louis Sachar. I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Louis Sachar.
But essentially, it's setting the US prison system, and you've got young boys who are like digging trenches and stuff like that, and sort of their outlook on life. And again, we've had quite a few students who've read the book and enjoyed it, but I haven't actually read the book, so I can't really say more than that. But because I've had students who've read it and enjoyed it, I think it would be a good recommendation, and it is a classic. My 10th book is by Suzanne Collins. It's The Hunger Games. I think that, again, it's got a strong female character, and it's set in this kind of weird dystopian world where people have to fight to, as in people get chosen and they've got to fight. Everyone's probably seen the movies, so again the book's quite enjoyable, dealing with quite difficult themes and more mature themes like death and betrayal and things like that. Probably a bit more of a mature title, but again I'd probably recommend it, especially for girls. So those were my 10 recommendations for intermediate books. Here are my 10 advanced books. My first book is Call of the Wild by Jack London. The reason why I recommend this book is actually because of the feedback that, again, I've got from students who've read it. So in year 6 and year 5, again, it's quite a difficult book to read simply because of when it was written. But I think they really, really enjoy the plot of the book. And I mean, what's not to like? It's about a dog who goes on adventures. My second book is The Jungle Book, which follows Mowgli. I think that's how you say his name, Mowgli. Everyone's probably seen the animated version. The book itself is actually quite challenging to read, but I think there's some, when a child reads something that they're a little bit familiar with, sometimes it actually helps them get into the story. Very, very challenging to read, as all Kipling books are. My third book is The Railway Children. The reason why I'd recommend this book is probably because of that, again, that First World War context. You got children being sent away to live in the countryside. That's a theme that could appear in, say, an 11 plus exam or in a SATs exam or something like that. So it's really good to get them into that sort of a historical context. Yeah, just enjoyable story, memorable characters, so it should be quite enjoyable and quite easy to get into. So my fourth book is Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. This follows a pig called Wilbur, I believe, and his friendship with a spider, Charlotte. Again, I've had students who've read the book and have enjoyed it, so I, again, wouldn't have any problem recommending it, especially if my students say it's a good book to read. My fifth book is The Borrowers. The reason why I'd recommend this is actually because I grew up watching the film. Again, it's one of those things where a child could watch the film, get into it, and then read the book. Because again, familiarity does tend to help a child approach more challenging books. It is definitely a challenging book to read. The language used in it, and not really the themes, but definitely the language and the time period. My sixth book is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. Again, it's a book that's quite close to my heart because that was the first adult book that I attempted reading. Really enjoyed it. It's got it's quite complex in the scientific side, and I'd say it's probably more of an adult book than a children's book, but I don't think it's, I read it when I was a child and I really enjoyed it. Boys love dinosaurs too, and I think that's a good way to get them into some more mature literature. My seventh book is Little Women. That follows the 4 Marsh sisters. Because of when it's set, it's relatively difficult to read, but it's an emotional book, and I think many girls will enjoy it. I think there's Little Men as well, which is by the same author, and I have not read that at all, but it could be a good recommendation for a boy, potentially. I'd have to actually look into that. My 8th book is Alice in Wonderland. It's a book I have read. It deals with, it just follows the journey of Alice. It's by Lewis Carroll, basically a classic children's book. And it sort of appears quite a lot in popular culture as well. So loads of Alice in Wonderland references sort of pop up here and there. So it's probably a good book to read just to improve a child's sort of general knowledge. My 9th book is The Secret Garden. The reason why I recommend this book is I remember watching the film when I was a child, and I really, really enjoyed the film. And then I read the book and I thought it was really beautifully written. Kind of a simple story in a way. You've got a young girl who's come back from India. She comes back to England and she spends time with this boy. Again, I can't remember his name. It's been a long time since I've read it. And she basically sort of changes the way he is. They discover this garden, the secret garden, and he's able to recover from his illness, which is actually more of a sort of mental illness rather than a sort of physical ailment. My 10th book is The Hobbit. It's a fast-paced fantasy that's very, very challenging to read. It follows the story of Bilbo Baggins and his adventures with the dwarves and the elves and the wizards and that kind of thing. You could always watch the film first and then read the book. And you'll see that there are things missing from the film that are in the book. So it's quite interesting for a child to read that and then spot where things have been left out and changed. I thought it was quite a funny book to read as well. So there is humour in the book, especially when they describe The Hobbit, a classic novel. And it could actually get the child into Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is, again, quite a challenging set of books to read. So those were my 10 recommendations for advanced books. So those were my 30 book recommendations. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you've got any other suggestions for other books that you could add to this list, please let us know in the comments below. And by no means is this an exhaustive list, these are just my recommendations.